Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
We just wrapped up the Thanksgiving holidays, and Christmas is right around the corner. It's a complicated time for many of us to be so close for so long to family members we fundamentally disagree with over virtually everything. For those of us who have left conservative evangelical spaces, it's not simply that we disagree with them about topics that makes it so difficult, but we think their side is a danger to society and is harming those we care about. For conservative Christians, on the other hand, the concern isn't so much about who is being harmed as it is about who isn't submitting to their worldview. They believe the entire planet is part of a spiritual battle that includes actual demons. One conservative Christian who has been making the rounds in more progressive spaces lately has been Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. She recently went on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, and there was a fascinating exchange between her, Bill, and Dan Farah, who is the director and producer of a documentary about aliens titled The Age of Disclosure.
In the film, one of the senior intelligence officials named Jay Stratton, he was the director of air and space warfare at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and then he ran the U.S. government's UAP task force. He tells a story about how he was trying to run this issue up the flagpole and bring attention to it.
At the Pentagon?
At the Pentagon, in a serious office space. And his superiors told him that they thought these things were demons and that he was doing the devil's work by looking into it. And on camera in the film, he says, I can't believe these words were coming out of their mouths. He's like, I'm briefing them on an advanced aerospace vehicle that's absolutely there. It's been spotted by trained observers like our Navy fighter pilots in their $80 million airplanes that we trust them with, right? It's been spotted on data collection systems like satellite and radar. And this guy's telling me it's a demon. It's insane. And he's like, my mind was blown, and this is something I'm dealing with inside of the government.
It's Halloween. Let me just ask the final question for the panel. Do you think demons and the devil are real?
Absolutely. I'm a Bible-believing Christian. I definitely, and I believe those could be fallen angels.
All these things could be real.
Fallen angels?
Yeah, fallen
The
angels.
aliens are fallen angels?
That's possible. I think that's what they could be. That's what makes sense in my worldview.
Notice how Farah described what these government officials said. They didn't simply say the aliens were actually demons. Instead, they said they believed the aliens were demons and that the people asking questions were, quote, doing the devil's work, unquote. So among conservative Christians, there's a connection between the belief in demons and people who disagree with them doing the work of demons. And this isn't some extremist remote view out there. Marjorie Taylor Greene herself agrees on set with it. Millions of white evangelicals would also agree. And within the conservative world of rad-trad Catholicism that we looked at in episodes 17 and 18 of Highest Power, Church and State, there are many Catholics who do as well. While these views may cause the likes of Bill Maher or Dan Farah to laugh on an HBO set, they're not at all fringe views. You'll often hear Christians say, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities in heavenly places. But in the world of Christian nationalist politics, the demonic powers and principalities are considered to be working through those who would oppose the causes of the religious right. This is why when we covered the worship battles in Seattle in episodes 25, 26, and 54, we played audio of worship leaders yelling at LGBTQ people while addressing demons. When you believe that anybody is essentially the stringed puppet of a demonic puppet master, you'll deal with people as if they are demons. So now you bring that mindset into a holiday like Thanksgiving. Suddenly, you're sitting at a table with family members who you think are demon puppets. Or, you're sitting at a table with family members who think you are a demon puppet. And that raises some questions. Because it's one thing to see rioters or protesters online and consider them to be demon puppets, but you can largely ignore them. But what do you do with a demon puppet who asks you to pass the mashed potatoes? And how do you make small talk with your family if you know they consider you to be a demon puppet? One of the wars that the right is waging right now that is dividing dinner tables is against immigrants. And the person leading the charge is White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. According to one of Miller's family members, his wife Katie, in an interview with Jesse Waters of Fox News, Miller is a speech-giving sexual matador.
You are married to Stephen Miller,
I am.
so you are the envy of all women. What is that like?
The sexual matador, right?
What is it like being married to such a sexual matador?
He is an incredibly inspiring man who gets me going in the morning with his speeches being like, let's start the day. I am going to defeat the left and we are going to win. He wakes up the day ready to carry out the mission that President Trump was elected to do.
But Katie's not the only family member at Stephen Miller's holiday table, and not all of his family members appreciate his speeches. His uncle is David Glosser. During the first Trump administration in 2018, Glosser wrote a piece for Politico titled, "Stephen Miller is an immigration hypocrite. I know because I'm his uncle." Glosser wrote, quote, "If my nephew's ideas on immigration had been in force a century ago, our family would have been wiped out," unquote. In his piece, he writes, quote, "Let me tell you a story about Stephen Miller and chain migration. It begins at the turn of the 20th century in a dirt floor shack in the village of Antipol, a shtetl of subsistence farmers in what is now Belarus. Beset by violent anti-Jewish pogroms and forced childhood conscription in the Tsar's army, the patriarch of the shack, Wolf Lieb Glosser, fled a village where his forebears had lived for centuries and took his chances in America. He set foot on Ellis Island on January 7, 1903, with $8 to his name. Though fluent in Polish, Russian, and Yiddish, he understood no English. An elder son, Nathan, soon followed. By street corner peddling and sweatshop toil, Wolflieb and Nathan sent enough money home to pay off debts and buy the immediate family's passage to America in 1906. That group included young Sam Glosser, who, with his family, settled in the western Pennsylvania city of Johnstown, a booming coal and steel town that was a magnet for other hard-working immigrants. The Glosser family quickly progressed from selling goods from a horse and wagon to owning a haberdashery in Johnstown, run by Nathan and Wolflieb, to a chain of supermarkets and discount department stores run by grandfather Sam, and the next generation of Glossers, including my dad, Izzy. It was big enough to be listed on the Amex Stock Exchange and employed thousands of people over time. In the span of some 80 years and 5 decades, this family emerged from poverty in a hostile country to become a prosperous, educated clan of merchants, scholars, professionals, and most important, American citizens. What does this classically American tale have to do with Stephen Miller? Well, Izzy Glosser is his maternal grandfather, and Stephen's mother, Miriam, is my sister. I have watched with dismay and increasing horror as my nephew, an educated man who is well aware of his heritage, has become the architect of immigration policies that repudiate the very foundation of our family's life in this country. I shudder at the thought of what would have become of the Glossers had the same policies Stephen so coolly espouses, the travel ban, the radical decrease in refugees, the separation of children from their parents, and even talk of limiting citizenship for legal immigrants, been in effect when Wolflieb made his desperate bid for freedom. The Glossers came to the U.S. just a few years before the fear and prejudice of the America First nativists of the day closed U.S. borders to Jewish refugees. Had Wolflieb waited, his family likely would have been murdered by the Nazis along with all but 7 of the 2,000 Jews who remained in Antipol. I would encourage Stephen to ask himself if the chanting, torch-bearing Nazis of Charlottesville, whose support his boss seems to court so cavalierly, do not envision a similar fate for him, unquote. And remember, this was in 2018, during the first Trump administration. I would imagine his words would be even more poignant today. So Glosser at the time spoke about his story in an interview with CNN's Anderson Cooper.
Piece you wrote, you describe your nephew, Stephen Miller, as an immigration hypocrite. What do you mean by that?
It's an important question, and I have to preface my response by saying that I wrote this article more in sadness than in anger or resentment. Our family history is entirely dependent upon the fact that our family was able to escape from a terrible situation in what is now the country of Belarus. In those days was part of the Russian Empire.
Your family first came here, I think, in the early 1900s.
The first of our particular group came over in 1903. They worked for a while peddling fruit and doing sweatshop work, and then they were able to round up enough money to bring over the rest of the immediate family. Everybody else who didn't make it, they were all swept away in the Holocaust and dead.
And so you're saying the hypocrisy
well, let's put it simply, had we not been able to enter America when we did, Stephen Miller would never exist.
As they continued their interview, Glosser points out that his family isn't the only family in the administration affected by immigration. Even the Trump family has been shaped by it.
And so this notion of chain migration, which is something the administration calls the opportunity for somebody who's come to the United States to apply to get their parents to come, their cousins, brothers or sisters to come, that has been part of your family history, of Stephen Miller's family history.
That is the classic story of virtually everybody in America who isn't a Native American or who was brought over unwillingly as a slave. That's everybody's story.
You referred to your nephew Stephen as an immigration hypocrite. Do you see this administration itself as hypocritical? The First Lady, her parents just got citizenship based on what the administration would call chain migration.
Well, let's think of it for a second. As far as I understand, Mr. Trump's grandfather came over, or either his father or his grandfather came over as an immigrant from Germany, trying to avoid draft into the German army. He's trying to find a new life here in the United States. His mother, I think, escaped the poverty of Scotland, looking for a better opportunity in New York City. And he is married as what's the count now? 3 immigrant women in the United States, and has just through chain migration, her parents have been made citizens of the United States, and I welcome them.
Glosser also pointed out how this current rendition of the America First movement isn't the first America First movement. And like the America First movements of the past, today's America First movement has a very dehumanizing way of talking about immigrants.
It's obviously always difficult to talk about race, and I always hesitate to even to bring it up in these circumstances. But the president has, there's been reporting that he's talked about immigrants coming from what he called shithole countries, talked about people from Haiti having AIDS, about people in Nigeria not wanting to go back to their huts, as if everybody in Nigeria lives in huts. I talked about people, why shouldn't more people from Norway come? Do you see a racial component in this administration, how they view this issue?
All those epithets are the sorts of things which were said about Jews, Irish, Poles, Hungarians, and virtually Italians, Sicilians, Sardinians, everybody from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, from the Balkan countries, were all condemned and vilified by the so-called America Firsters of their day. These people were described frequently as slime pumped out of the mud tanks of Europe, rapists, murderers, thieves, gangsters. And thankfully, the United States has made progress, as fitful as it may be, in reforming immigration laws so that we no longer had these racial quotas. It is hard to escape the conclusion, based on the administration's actions and policies rather than their rhetoric, it's hard to escape the conclusion that they want to disadvantage people coming from countries based on their religion, based on their ethnicity, and based on their countries and regions of origin.
Did it surprise you that Stephen was involved in this? That when you see him as a leading voice in the administration?
Sadly, it's no surprise. It appears that much of his professional identity and his personal identity has been wrapped up in this particular issue, though I do not know why.
This is why it's so important for journalists today to be learning from and sharing the perspectives of historians. How else would we know that there have been other America First movements in the past who spouted the same dehumanizing terms about immigrants? Wouldn't having that knowledge lead us to ask some questions about our current movement? But of course, those promoting today's America First movement say, but they're all criminals. Here was Stephen Miller's wife, Katie, saying this on CNN and getting called out for it.
Wait, I want to finish this.
Please do.
I was President Trump's immigration spokesperson in the first term. I have been saying this on the record since we shut down the government to build the wall back in 2018. We are removing every single illegal alien that's in this country. And I would say a majority of those who've been removed have had serious violent crimes.
That's
today
not true.
Today in the New Yorker.
That's not true. I hope
Today
you
in
want
the
to
New
quote
Yorker.
sources saying that.
That is actually
that's false.
Today in the New Yorker.
Demonstrably false.
Today in the New Yorker.
Based on DHS's own data, a majority of the people that they've detained have not had violent criminal records
that have been removed.
They have not. They have not had violent criminal records.
Up until last year, if I'm not mistaken.
It's one thing to spread these dehumanizing lies against immigrants today. It's another thing to do so when your very own family came from a very similar situation a century ago. But imagine being in a position of power within the White House and having your very own family member be arrested for deportation. That is exactly what happened to White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt. According to CBS News, quote, Bruna Caroline Ferreira, the mother of White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt's nephew, was arrested by ICE in Massachusetts after they said she overstayed her tourist visa. Ferreira has an 11-year-old son with Michael Leavitt, Carolyn's brother. He lives in New Hampshire. Her lawyer, Todd Pomerleau, said, quote, she came here at 6 years old. 6. The age of 6. And DHS is calling her a criminal illegal alien. She's literally trying to run to the finish line to get her green card, and she gets tackled on the way there, unquote. He said she's been transported from locations in Massachusetts and New Hampshire to Vermont and then Louisiana in an unconstitutional merry-go-round. Jeffrey Rubin, who is also one of her attorneys, said, quote, the same government who protected her and afforded her a path to citizenship has chosen to instead abuse its entrusted powers and embark on a cruel and inhumane random mass deportation that now ensnares a relative of someone in the inner circle of the White House, unquote. As of the time of this recording, Leavitt has offered no comment on the matter. So imagine sitting down for your holiday dinner with the families we've mentioned. In each of these cases, the people who are beholden to Trump are disconnecting from their families. They're choosing a justice that would harm their families. Miller is breaking up immigrant families while ignoring the fact that he comes from an immigrant family. Trump is breaking up immigrant families while ignoring the fact that his wives and children have the same story. Carolyn Leavitt is defending the breaking up of immigrant families while ignoring the fact that her own family is being broken up by the administration she represents. In each case, a healthy human might consider the story of their own family and be moved with compassion as their cruelty hits home. It's one thing to harm a stranger. It's one thing to harm a statistic. But your own family? Surely that might be a wake-up call to the inhumanity of it all. But that's not how the Millers, the Trumps, and the Levitts respond. Instead, they plow ahead with cruelty because, as they say, these people are lawbreakers and must be punished. It reminds me of a family gathering I attended recently. We were surrounded by evangelical family members who were asking us about what we believed now, since we deconstructed the conservative theology we held to our entire lives. Then at one point, I decided to cut through all the words about God's love and Jesus' sacrifice and taking the punishment we deserve, and instead point the attention to what they were saying about their family members. I said, so if you're right, then there's going to be a moment when you watch Jesus pick us up in his hands and hurl us into the flames of hell. You're going to be watching while we and our kids scream and burn, and you're going to be okay with that? You're going to just go from that to singing songs about the goodness of justice? You could feel the weight of the moment in that room. This was the moment of truth. Are you willing to embrace a justice as good news that tortures your family? Then one of our relatives spoke up and said, yes. So I asked, how? How could you live with yourself knowing that was going down? And they responded, because you had your chance and you made your choice. There are multiple layers here that need to be addressed. 1, they don't consider immigrants as family. The America First agenda puts walls not simply around land, but around kindness. If you're in the walls, you get treated with some degree of kindness as long as you bend the knee and are okay with those in charge putting you in your place. But if you're outside the walls, you're not family. You're the enemy. You're a threat. And so you must be treated with indifferent cruelty. That's why U.S. aid has been cut off. causing hundreds of thousands of deaths, without hardly anyone on the right caring at all. It's why the dehumanizing language is used to describe outsiders as dirty, slimy vermin. The religious and political right today doesn't recognize all of humanity as family, as related, as interdependent, as indispensable parts of a whole. And that brings us to our second layer, which is how this exile can be healed. My initial instinct would be to try to convince them that all humanity is part of a family. And ultimately, that's just the first step, because we know through evolution and quantum physics that everything is related. Humans, animals, plants, earth, water, wind, fire. We're all part of an inextricably interdependent whole that can't be divided, no matter what stories we tell ourselves. When conservatives balk at this because they're too afraid to believe in evolution and think accepting modern science would overturn what Christians have always believed, we could point them to the words of the 13th century mystic, St. Francis of Assisi, in the Canticle of Creatures, who spoke of the entire cosmos as a family, with brother sun and sister moon. Because for many people, no matter what disagreements someone might have with a family member, blood is blood. So perhaps by showing how we're all family, we can encourage conservatives to accept that everyone belongs and should be valued as family. Another idea would be to share history with them. When you learn how white people used the Canaanite conquest narratives in the Bible to justify genocide against Native Americans and taking their land as plunder, or when you learn how they used the story of Noah or Paul's writings to justify slavery and segregation of black people, a lot of the current narratives that promote white supremacy begin to make a lot of sense. We've been doing this for a long time. But unfortunately, sharing these realities doesn't seem to work. Because for conservative Christians, reality is interpreted as a hierarchy of authority and submission that exists for the sacralization of the highest power. So whether one is family becomes irrelevant. All that matters is submission, an absolute, unconditional surrender. So any version of science or history that calls universal submission to their authority into question is seen as propaganda. And anyone who doesn't perfectly obey is considered an outsider, an exile, an enemy, or a threat worthy of punishment. Any hint of empathy toward these enemies must be squashed because that might soften the lines between insiders and outsiders. So what do we do with people who are okay with violence toward their own family? I don't know that there's much we can do other than to live in ways that might soften their heart toward us. Because ultimately what's going on here is that their dedication to hierarchy has turned their hearts to stone. And until they have a heart of flesh, they're always going to eventually respond to violence against us by saying, you had your chance and you made your choice. And maybe, as difficult and as painful as some of these holiday gatherings can be, maybe that's what these holiday gatherings can provide us. Opportunities amidst games and meals, stories and decorations, for some seed of humanity buried in their souls to sit with the reality that someone other than them is human and belongs. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform. And we'll be back with another episode on Thursday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.